Welcome back to what I think is the 5th episode of Unbuffered, our new podcast that combines our old podcasts here at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, dealing with internet access and technology more broadly. Kind of think of the show as dealing with technology and how we organize society and how those things overlay each other. I'm Chris Mitchell with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Got up early this morning. We had our board meeting yesterday. ILSR continues to operate as a more than 50-year-old nonprofit organization. Had a very inspiring meeting with the board and some of the folks that have been running the organization, and it's great. So I'm in a good mood, but also I've already been up for half the day as we're recording here in the morning. On the show, I'm really excited to have Jade back, Jade Piros de Carvalho. Did I get it right? Without even
Close
checking
enough, Chris.
Close enough.
Pyros,
Jade Piros.
Pyros de Carvalho. Just think pyromaniac. It's
I just
Greek.
always want to make you Greek. And you're with Idea Tech as well as some other folks, but you're a longtime Kansas commentator at this point.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
I'm excited to get you on another live panel show, and we've got some news about those coming up soon, and we're going to get you on one this spring, I'm sure.
I got to be careful live because, I can be spicy and I need to...
That's why we want you. And so, but for now, we're bottling you for folks.
Yeah. Appreciate that.
And then we also have who my car thinks the name of is Sean Gonsalves. Welcome, Sean Gonsalves. And also, when I told my car to call you this morning when I was driving home from the airport, it said Sean has 2 numbers, and then it listed 2 identical numbers. And I'm just saying, AI is not doing so hot for me. So welcome, Sean. You do all our communications work as associate director. Associate director, is that right? Yeah.
Associate director of comms, and I'm calling Houston from Artemis -2.
That's right. For people who aren't aware of the background, Sean, his feet are firmly rooted on the ground, but his head is rooted in space.
That's right.
So it's been a good month for Sean here.
Enjoy.
Today, we're going to be talking about an article that talks about internet access and compares the United States, Switzerland, and Germany, and tries to draw some lessons from it. It's an article called "The Free Market Lie," and it was written and posted on GitHub. I actually don't have the author right here.
His name is Stefan Schuler.
Thank you, Stefan Schuler. And it had some good comments. We'll pick some things out to laud praise and some criticism. But we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about digital equity a bit. Sean wrote a great profile of a woman in San Antonio. That's really inspiring regarding how digital equity training has changed her life and why these are important investments. So that's going to be what we talk about in the middle part of the show. And then toward the end, we're debuting a new section. And Sean, let me just ask you, what are we going to call this recurring segment on the show?
What the tech?
What the tech?
That's clever. That's clever, boys. I like that.
It's Sean's invention, so I'll let him give that giggle up.
I didn't want to say it, but
when I mentioned that to other folks in the room yesterday at our board meeting, there was a lot of enjoyment of it, and I will say that one of the people in the room said that they are sad to see Connect This go because it was such a good name for a show. Connect This. So
it really was, though.
Yeah, we'll bring it back in some way. I'm sure that I will not leave the earth without having found a new way to use that phrase, I'm sure. So, okay, let's dive in. So this article is interesting. Jade, did you get a chance to review it?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I'm just curious. As someone who's working directly for ISPs, you've worked with the federal government on the BEAD program. I'm sure you've thought a ton about regulation at the federal, the state level from different angles. How did you react to this article?
Well, okay, so I thought it was an interesting illustration of how you could do it way wrong on the Germany side, by gold plating everything. How you can do it way wrong by privatizing everything and, this kind of utopian model. But I think my biggest question to you, Chris, is how do you go back from where we're at now? I'm not saying like, okay,
Yes,
we
it's
shouldn't
such a
have
good
done it that
question.
way from the start, but now that we're working in this privatized model, I just don't see how you ever make your way back to the way it quote unquote should have been done. We could say that about any number of policies or like our healthcare system or lots of other, you know, big thorny problems in America, but I don't see how we move from, what we have now to
Yeah, it's a way to phrase it that's in keeping with Sean's Artemis focus is we're building a moon colony. Yeah, let's learn the lessons from the Swiss in terms of having multiple fibers to the home and having aggregation points at which different ISPs can get in there and that sort of a thing. Yeah, absolutely. There, but we're not colonizing the moon. We're trying to figure out how to solve challenges in our cities that have existing infrastructure.
Right. Well, we should, but for folks who haven't read the article, we should probably talk about what's actually in it.
So, how would you summarize it, Sean?
Well, first of all, when I read it, it made me want to yodel. In Swiss. I would summarize it as basically that, as you alluded to, comparing the United States, Germany, and Switzerland. So in Switzerland, apparently 25 gig symmetrical services available everywhere.
No, I think that's a little overstated in the article, but that is what the article suggests.
In most cities, I think is really what it's talking about. But how there's real competition. You've got like a dozen or more providers in most cities, and it talks about that and then compares how in the United States, where we worship the free market and say just let private market do whatever it wants, we actually have worse service, higher prices, and all of these territorial monopolies. And I like that phrase, territorial monopolies, too. I thought that was pretty good. And then in Germany, which is sort of often criticized for, as Jay talked about, that gold-plated where it's overly regulated. So he asked a question basically saying, how is it that in a nation like the United States, where it's laissez-faire, free market capitalism, let private sector do whatever it wants, Germany overregulated, we have very similar sort of internet service and lack of choice, etc. Where Switzerland, there's a difference. And so he explores that. And he talks about natural monopolies, which I think is important to understand this whole thing. And then, lands on how Switzerland has, I guess you would call it like a particular type of an open access model, right? I feel like most fiber networks go into the creating moon bases, we're already where we're at, where a lot of fiber networks, I think, use PON, right? Which is shared
passive optical networks, shared infrastructure.
Shared infrastructure.
If I would jump in for a second, there's multiple critiques, and one is a technological critique, and I think his article would have been better if he didn't go down that path. And there's people that care very passionately about whether you build a network where every home has its own dedicated fiber back to a point of presence or the network operations center, and there's there's good reasons to discuss this and to talk about what is the appropriate model, what's cost effective, what is future proof, and this and that. But I'll say that I think that the technological differences for a home user are more or less imperceptible across most networks.
And there are huge energy demands on the active side versus the PON side, which again, we don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but everything's a trade-off. And when it comes to the end consumer, that's what we need to focus on. What is the biggest difference, right?
Right. And so I think the thing that people I think should focus on is, what do people want? What do they need?
Yeah.
And I will say that, and Sean, I feel like that pretty much sums it up. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say before I offer.
There's a couple of little other spots in the article that I thought were interesting to note, but
okay.
we can come back to that.
All right. Anyway, I feel like the technological question of okay, well, I'm sharing it with my neighbors, but most of my neighbors aren't home. There's just it's not the case that in many cases you are during prime time throttled down to 10% of what you're paying for because of congestion from the neighborhood. That I've never seen any evidence that is happening, and I don't think that is happening. And the other thing I'll say is that I do feel like there's a lot that we need to improve. I think that a majority of Americans have internet access that is not meeting their needs and is creating some kind of drag on us, both our wallets, our innovation, and just the fact that we're stuck on hold and our time when we have to deal with problems. At the same time, I don't want to overstate that like everything's broken. Like I don't know, if I lived in a territory I get G fiber, it's $70 a month. It's been $70 a month for a year, $70 a month for years. Like it seems like they're doing a good job. If I lived in the Utopia area, I'd be thrilled if I could get fiber from a small private company that's crushing the record, crushing the stats. That'd be great. And so there are places where it has worked, but I think it is true that we don't have a plan to solve this issue for most people. So I just always want to defend us a little bit, and to its credit, this article does note one of the things you should do is support the right of local communities to build their own networks, and I think also to partner with appropriate folks to improve networks. So anyway, that's I get a little bit touchy about that, but I will say that I want to this is something I want to go deep with Benoit Felton on in the future, who studies a lot of the international systems, and he's a Frenchman. He lived in China for a long time and studied their systems, and just he thinks about these telecom issues a lot. And this idea of structural separation versus functional separation, which he kind of alludes to not working well in Germany. Well, in Britain, I think it's gone even worse. And that's because they didn't build a new network that might be, that is separable. So there's a lot more lessons to learn from Europe than I think we got out of this. But
there's a couple other things. There's a couple other things that I would highlight that I think are worth the consideration.
Okay.
Which is that, well, first of all, in it, he talks about how, I don't know if Swisscom is like the equivalent of AT&T in Switzerland or something like that. But
so I looked into this just briefly, and I'm not an expert on this, but Swisscom is an incumbent, and it's fascinating to me that they originally proposed this structural separation system.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. They were 51% owned by the government, whereas Deutsche Telekom, which has been so resistant in playing the same games in Germany that our large companies play, they are owned by the state and a minority. So I think the public owns 2 large shares of Deutsche Telekom, but they add up to less than a controlling share.
Right,
and so
but
I don't know if that makes a big difference.
Right, exactly. But I still think it's interesting that you have a large incumbent that actually was arguing against the single fiber and how it would create this monopoly. And I think
Italy did that.
Regulation would actually be necessary. I mean, can you imagine a telecom company in the United States saying that regulation is necessary? So that I thought
Theodore Vail did it 120 years ago. But yeah, no, it's been 110 years. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah, well, he also thought that AT&T should, be the only telecom company in the world. But anyway, but then when Schuler, the author of this piece, gets to the 5 basic things he thinks we should do. See, I'm more of a an authoritarian when it comes to this. And so there was a lot of things where I was exactly when he says mandate open access physical infrastructure, enforce point-to-point architecture, create a neutral fiber standard. And here's the thing, and I like this phrase too, empower competition authorities. We never call people competition authorities. We call them regulators, which allows for all of this, these word games about deregulation and stuff like that, when competition authorities is a better phrase for what we're actually talking about, which is not to squeeze out capitalism per se or all aspects of free market competition. It's really to have some authorities or referees to ensure that we actually have competition. So I thought those were important things to point out.
So Sean, I'm going to agree with you that the whole point of a market is to have a marketplace of choices. And so obviously we're not really operating in a truly free market in this respect. But are you really proposing that we take all these private networks and force them to be open to anybody else? I mean,
if I was ruler for a day, yes.
Yeah. So how do you think the government should take ownership in the networks like they did in these other countries that were listed in the article? Because I think both of those are shocking kind of suggestions. And do you think that would fix the problem?
Right.
If we had a lawyer on, they might say, Chris, you're an idiot. But I'm not sure the federal government has the authority to own telecommunications networks are for the public.
Didn't Trump take 10%? What was that company?
Yeah, Intel, I think it was, right?
Well, of 7 or 8 or maybe even more companies
which
now.
I fell out of my chair when I read that, you
Right.
know?
No, and I mean, the issue with that, I think, is we are a very litigious society. And so it's not always the case that we can just adopt a culture that is quite different, that is, the legal structure of somewhere else. And so I worry about solutions that might look good on paper that result in 10 years of telecommunications lawsuits and no progress.
Yeah, like,
No, no,
I
no
don't think we
one's
should nationalize our networks.
no one's ever accused me of having practical ideas. Okay?
But no, this is like, you're not the only one suggesting this. There are other people, and I've questioned whether or not we should have that debate on this show with people that really would push for national open access. And I think we probably should. I've just been nervous about it, in part because I don't like having angels dancing on the head of a pin arguments that are, kind of like, like, well, it's not going to happen. But I
Yeah.
don't know. With the backlash against tech, I don't think we can predict
Oh my gosh.
where the
Yeah.
old Overton window is going.
No doubt.
But I do think that the idea of focusing on competition is a good one, right? I've said before, for the 30 years since the Telecommunications Act was passed, the general thing that the federal government has focused on is removing what they called barriers to competition. But it turns out that simply removing barriers does not produce competition. One needs pro-competition policies in place. And the thing that drives me nuts about this, when I see the term free market, I have a little like mini like burst of anger, because I'm reminded of where people try to tell us that, like, I'm in support of free trade, and that's why we have this 24,000 page agreement for free trade,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, that's not free trade. That's just the pharmaceutical companies writing the trade rules.
That's
That's
the
not.
problem about, the whole term of free markets. Like, there are guidelines. They're not just unfettered. Like, this
Mhm.
isn't science,
Yeah,
natural law. There are policies baked in, depending on where the lobbying dollars are, that choose these winners and losers. And so people, you'll hear policymakers saying, we're not going to choose winners and losers. We need a free market. I'm like, well, you are.
you need rules.
It's just a little bit hidden to the average person who doesn't understand economics or these
Yeah,
macro
you need
issues.
rules. You need to figure out how the courts are going to adjudicate things, and like, it is impossible to write a neutral set of rules on these industries. And so I feel like we should be very active in saying thumb on the scale for more competition.
Right.
And not only that, but also locally. I mean, I would put thumb on the scale for like locally accountable networks, and that sort of a thing. So, but I think my ultimate critique with all of this is that people don't want competition.
No.
And I don't know. People don't want choice of utilities. They don't want choice of water providers. They don't want choice of electric providers. People say they want choice when they have a bad option, that they don't, when they
Right.
feel like they're
Yeah.
overpaying.
That's
They
a
feel like
great
they're getting a
point.
product that's not
That is a
good.
good point. Because
You know,
it's a pain to change.
That's what it is. And also like the decision fatigue. It's like there's so many
Yeah.
choices sometimes, and it's like, do you really want to be like going through 12 different like ISPs, like, all of the, fine print to try to figure out, it's like, like, that's why when I always get, like, lose my mind when people say, oh, like when it comes to like insurance, like you can choose like all these, like, yeah, I'm going to read like a 400-page, like, insurance manual to figure out, what's the best, option for me is,
and still get suckered.
You want enough choices to force fair behavior
If you
on
can do that,
the
that's
part of the
exactly
company.
it. And so that's the question, is that, like, I mean, our work focused on municipal networks and co-ops. But when we're thinking more about so co-ops are more like a solution for rural areas where we're never expecting real competition, right?
Mhm.
Now we're going to perhaps have two satellite competitors, and the co-ops will face some competitive pressure, which in some cases might push the co-op to be better. But in most cases, the co-op is doing a great job without any competition. But in a municipal space, the question is, if you're building the moon colony, I think you'd probably build the Swiss model, and you say, we're not going to have competition in fiber optic wires. We're going to have competition in services, and people are going to be using the same fiber optic cable. And then, there's going to be a customer service and pricing and perhaps other, like, how good your lag to earth is. Like, you're going to be measured on other things, and you have competition at that level. But you also might just say, we're going to have utility, and we're going to have it be run appropriately. But I will say that, like, we have 150 years of experience of that with electricity. We have 120 years of that with national telecoms and whatnot. And the results aren't great. There's a reason we moved away from monopoly systems, in copper to more competitive systems, in part because we thought there'd be multiple technologies that would create this flourishing of options that Jade, you just noted, which is that you got to have enough market competition for that to work. And we are stuck between those things right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we
Any
didn't
last
solve
comments on
that. Next.
So from there, we wanted to move to talking about digital equity, and particularly because Sean did a great a window into this person from San Antonio that Deanna on our team connected us with, Belinda Parker Mendoza, who yes, I always think of McBain. For Simpsons fans out there, I can't see the name Mendoza without immediately flashing back to a vaguely Arnold Schwarzenegger-esque character overacting in The Simpsons. But Sean, you were quite taken with this piece and really inspired by it. So tell us what the highlights are.
I was taken with it because to me, her story embodies what it is that we're actually after. So, we talk about technology and open access networks and municipal broadband and all this kind of stuff, but ultimately, like, what does it matter? And why is connectivity so important for people? And so her story to me illustrated that in a really powerful way. And, she's someone who lives in one of the Opportunity Home complexes in San Antonio,
Which is public housing.
which is public housing. They've got a bunch of them across the city. And was really in a tough spot, especially after her parents died. And so one day she goes down to get the mail, she was kind of just only doing. She comes from a family of 10 siblings. No one in the family, including her mom and dad, have had a diploma of any kind, high school, college, whatever. Actually, her father graduated from high school and went straight to work.
Yeah. Yep.
But none of her siblings. And so anyway, fast forward, she's 45 years old. She's got an adult daughter, but was really struggling with the death of her parents and a lack of sort of employment opportunities and these kind of things. She had no device. She had no internet service at home. One day she goes out to her car, and one of the folks that work, one of the staff at Opportunity Homes, I think it was handing out flyers and said, hey, do you want to help hand out these flyers? That led to her kind of getting involved in doing some volunteering, got into their resident apprentice program. Then AmeriCorps Vista had a digital skills training course, within the Opportunity Homes that she was encouraged to apply for. She got it. And it just changed her life. Because she went through that course, she was able to get this refurbished Dell laptop. They were able to sign her up for ACP, which allowed her to get internet service for the first time. And all of that led to her going to San Antonio College, a community college, got her associate's degree, 4.0 GPA, transferred to Palo Alto College, I think the name of it. She's working on her bachelor's degree. And it has all of these ripple effects. And in the story, she just talks about how she's very clear about how that laptop and that internet connection totally transformed her life. And it cascaded outward. So she became a trainer of trainers, even in these digital skills training courses. And now within, that apartment complex, people don't just see her sad. They see her as confident and knowing something about technology, and they've seen it change her life. And now she pushed her daughter's got an associate's degree. She's working towards a bachelor's degree. And so I just think it's a really powerful story because the ACP, we just let die. The Digital Equity Act got terminated, and both of those programs were really designed to produce more Belindas and lead to those kind of results. And now all of that, ACP doesn't even exist anymore. And the Digital Equity Act and the court litigation that's going on with that is still tied up in the court. And there's a lot of programs that were going to rely on that kind of funding to create these kind of opportunities for folks, which I think is exactly what we want. And so I just thought she was really inspirational and really embodied the why of what we're all talking about and what we're all doing.
I want to make sure for people who may not be familiar, because it's like ACP's been gone long enough. That's the Affordable Connectivity Program that
Right.
delivered $30 a month benefit to families to help them afford internet access, many of whom did not have to make a payment beyond that. That covered the cost
That
for many of
23
the.
million households,
Yes.
not individuals, but households were using.
Right. Sorry. So what'd you say, Jade?
I was just gonna commend Sean because he did such a good job on that profile. And yeah, you're right. That's exactly what that was intended to do. And we need to start looking at these programs as investments into people, families, communities, instead of as costs. And I don't want to get like super controversial or off topic telecom wise, but I do want to point out that it really shows a country's priorities
Mm,
when you can find 50 million or $50 billion, which is
mhm.
three and a half ACPs, to spend in like a week or two on a
Right.
pointless war. And you continue to say that ACP was a handout, that it was too liberally applied, that it was a cost we can't bear. Um, I- we could afford to do that program, and it's widely, supported on both the private and the public side. So I wouldn't say that it's gone away completely. I mean, I know it is, but we're expecting a USF report this summer. Let's hope there's an affordability or an adoption component of
Mhm.
that. The DEA is not dead, Sean. It is in the
You're right.
court.
You're right. It's
In the
not dead.
story, Sean notes it is working. There are people who are challenging it. I
Don't
believe
put that
National
out in the universe.
Digital Alliance.
I believe it will
I
prevail.
think
Don't
it.
you, Chris?
I do expect that it will come back as long as Congress doesn't decide to remove it while it's dead. I think as long as Congress doesn't change anything, I think the courts will find that it has been improperly terminated and will be restored. I don't know exactly what I expect to happen after that.
Mm,
So,
And we
and
still
that
have
could.
22 billion in non-deployment that could
right.
ostensibly be used for
Yes.
some of these. Um, well, we don't know.
Right, but I will
We
say,
don't know.
Jade, picking up on one of the points that you made, when I was, so we'll talk in a second about some of the states that are doing an affordable connectivity program like Effort. And when I was searching for some of the rules on California's pilot that they're about to do or that they've started doing, I did California Lifeline, and like it auto completes. The first option is fraud. Now, if I did like Pentagon spending, I don't know that the first one would be fraud, but I can tell you that like government programs had fraud. And frankly, I'm a big fan of inspector generals. And I think we need to be doing a good job of policing fraud because aside from wasted money, it's when people lose faith in these programs that we
Yes.
really start to have problems of actually being able to have a society that functions. And so like it is essential that we combat fraud. But the level of fraud that we put up with in some areas is like magnificent. And the level of fraud we put up with in other areas, the level of fraud is very small. And we act
Right.
like we should spend $20 million to stamp out $3 million worth of fraud.
Hmm.
I think we should be making sure that we can minimize fraud as much as possible. But at a certain point, like humans are going to find a way to cheat, and we need to keep
Right.
that down to an acceptable level. Like
Right.
recognize there are costs to trying to stamp it out entirely. So we just need to be adults about some of this stuff.
Right. I get frustrated with the throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of approach stuff. I mean, it's like, you know, of course with any institution or business or anything, there's always going to be some level of cheating or fraud or something like that. But it's like, I feel like making an argument of getting rid of an entire concept or a program based on, a certain, sort of low level kind of like fraud and stuff like that. It's like, because like some restaurants like, got busted for like not following like good health practices, that the idea of restaurants are a bad idea. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, we use these really tiny marginal peripheral, 1 to 2% to justify getting rid of it. And then we spin our wheels putting so much energy into figuring out how that 1 to 2% doesn't happen instead of just delivering on programs for the American public, which we know can be done. I'm still a big believer that in government's ability to improve the lives of people through programs. I still believe that, but it's super broken now. But there are examples out there where it's happening and where people are proving that these things aren't that hard, and I don't think ACP was that hard. If we do believe that the 200% poverty level was too high, take it back down to 135 or to 150. There are these compromises that can be made, but to just act like it's too hard to figure out how we can make it happen without fraud, it's not rocket science.
Well, I think the pathway to creating that political will is by profiling people
Yes.
who demonstrate that it is working. And I often think of Susan Crawford's book, Fiber. She profiled a person who in Wilson, the city in North Carolina, that they built an amazing fiber optic network that is just succeeded in any metric that you would like to apply to it. It's been wildly successful. 3 different programs to help low-income families take advantage of the services that are available. And in her book, Susan Crawford noted a woman who had pursued a nursing degree because she was able to do it from her apartment there, as opposed to trying to take her 2 children to the library. In that, as they were able to get devices and better know how to use them, her children, their disciplinary record improved, I believe. I don't know if I'm combining stories, but we've seen that in a number of cases where when people have real opportunity and they feel like that someone actually cares about them, they often are more productive. Members of society, even if they're 11 years old.
Yeah, no doubt.
11-year-olds know this stuff. So I wanted to give you a chance to tell us briefly about New Mexico, because there's an important thing that they're doing with the Affordable Connectivity Program there.
Right. Well, as it relates to all of these things, whether it's the ACP-like thing or the Digital Equity Act, as a transition, I love the thing that Belinda said at the very end of that article, which is that it's never too late. You don't have to sprint. You don't have to jog. If you can't walk, crawl, just start. And just start is what New Mexico did. And they said, they were, surprised at the end of ACP, but also recognized how important universal access to internet is. And so they said, we need to fix this. And they created what I guess you would call an ACP style. It's actually called LITAP, and I forget exactly what the acronym stands for. But what they did is they took their state level universal service fund and they changed it so that it wasn't just here's a surcharge on your bill that pays for landlines. It's here's a surcharge on your bill that can help subsidize the maybe 7 to 10% of the population who needs a subsidy in order to afford internet. And so that's what they did. And they, they were able to do that without having to raise taxes or create a whole new budget. They essentially took the existing surcharge for their essential Lifeline program was about 50 cents per connection. They think this will raise it to about $2. So for about $1.50 more per connection, they're able to fund this in perpetuity at a tune of $45 million a year, which they think will cover everyone in the state that could qualify for it, would be able to get access to it. And in talking to Senator Mike Padilla, who really spearheaded this legislation, he's the Democratic Senate whip, and he's been around for 16 years. And talking to him, he makes it really clear of how important it is to have a real champion within, state legislature to push these kind of things forward, and all of the kind of groundwork that has to be laid in order for this kind of stuff to even be possible. Because they filed the bill officially on January 26th, and 2 weeks later, the governor signed it. And that's incredibly fast. But behind the scenes, this was something that he had been working on with his colleagues for years. He's actually really involved in broadband issues. He filed the legislation that created New Mexico's broadband office and some other stuff. So this has been, it was ongoing, but that preparing the ground and being ready to file legislation and having a champion is super important, but it's also like super inspiring. And there's now other states that are like looking at this and being like,
I
Right. And
love
so,
um, the laboratories of democracy
mm,
idea. And I really do think states should have the ability to create programs that, work best for them. But if my only concern with this, because I thought that was brilliant, but there's like this ethos in the Midwest that really ties like income level to morality. I don't know if that exists like everywhere,
mm,
but as long as that exists, it's really difficult to get these Midwestern states like Kansas
mm.
to do things like that because they feel that they're somehow like encouraging people to, I don't know, not improve
Load or
themselves. I hate saying that because I love Kansas and we're great, nice people,
well,
but
it's,
it's
it's
just so
interesting, right? I
deeply
mean,
embedded in the culture.
I don't know if people are aware, but when 130 years ago, there was very few libraries. Most families owned a book, right? The Bible, and didn't own other books, didn't come into contact with other books. I might be overstating a little bit or missing the years by a little bit, but that's more or less the trend. And one of the things that Carnegie did, I have plenty to say about Carnegie being a terrible, horrible person and destroying the lives of many families. But he felt it was really important to give people the opportunity to improve themselves with books. And so he helped to establish libraries. And so like you have this like American businessman who embodies the let them lift themselves up by their bootstraps sort of mentality. And for him, that was key, was that like you had to give them, make sure they had bootstraps, they had to make sure they had libraries in their community that they could go and
Yeah.
improve themselves with. And it is disappointing to have this sense of like, not only like you should have to like, slaughter the cow to get the leather to make your bootstraps. Like, at a certain point, like
Yeah.
Mhm.
what are we doing here? And so,
Right.
yeah, I mean like,
Yeah,
but
I'm
the
curious
libraries,
if you guys think we've lost this, because I feel this sometimes. Has our country lost this shared value of the American dream? Because I feel like sometimes with the growing inequality that there is a caste of people who feel like, no, like there's only a few of us who deserve
yeah, young people like you
abundance.
are. Yeah, my understanding, Jade, I just listened to some focus groups this morning that were talking about younger generations and how there is this sense that they will not get ahead, that the
Right.
deck is too stacked against them. I lived it. My family, I was born into a family with two working class people that did not have degrees, or my mom was a registered nurse, and my dad would later go back to college. And so we went from being working class solidly to being, I mean, I would describe them as the upper middle class at the least, is how I kind of finished. My dad was able to get a job that was so well paying that I could go to a private college. And I paid off my debt in 20 years, which was substantial, like because I was able to then get, this job and create a family where we had sufficient income. So like it's hard for me because I've seen it happen, but I also know that that is not a common experience right now.
Right. I will say this, but my sense is that yes, I think that shared value ethos is very still much alive. I really do. I think that I would even go so far as to say that I think most Americans have that ethos isn't completely dead, but it's in an environment that's like survival of the richest environment. And we're talking about libraries and books. You know how we can kind of help reclaim it? You want to talk about banning books? Get Ayn Rand books out of libraries for
No,
the
no, no.
love of God. That
I
is what
no,
that's
no,
what's
no,
driving this.
no. I mean, I think people should learn to critique Ayn Rand books
Yeah,
and
you have to go through
understand.
your teenage angst phase of reading every Ayn Rand book and then realizing how bullshit they all are and that she died miserable for a reason. Like it's part of
I,
the process.
let me say this. Like this could be very controversial among people that I like quite a bit. If you have built things, not everyone is a builder, right? Like if you're a small entrepreneur, you get a sense of how the deck is stacked against you, how hard it is. And if you're really paying attention, you get a sense of how lucky you are. Because
Mhm.
like a lot of us recognize when we're unlucky, and other people don't recognize when they're lucky. So, I started a photography company. It's not to be too grandiose. I'm a photographer, and for 25 years, people have paid me, and I've maintained clients, and I've like run a business and filed taxes, and like the bare minimum of like being a businessman in America. And I fully see how some people get frustrated when people who don't do that, who haven't taken those risks, who expect other people, and this Travis would say, whether you're a paycheck, if you sign the front of the check or the back of the check. And there is a difference once you've like taken responsibility for paying other people. And there's a frustration for people that have only ever received that and not taken on that responsibility. And I think it is overworked. I'm not going to say that it's like, that like all of the criticisms are true, but like there is a mentality and a sense of there's an us versus them that can develop when you've gone through that. And you see how a poorly thought out government regulation can threaten something you've spent 20 years building. You start to be nervous about any government regulation,
Mhm.
and so like I've seen that happen, and I think that's Ayn Rand is totally bonkers town, but like the sentiments that are in there are not wholly unjustified. I guess
Well,
that's the
here's the
best
thing.
defense I could give her.
Yeah, I hear you, and I'm sure she appreciates that. But I will just say this: besides the fact that she is one of the most verbose fools that I've ever read, and is an objectively maybe the worst writer in literary history. That aside, just looking at the ideas, cool. Like I can relate. Like all of us have been a part of group projects where like one or two people do all the work and everybody else is just kind of hanging on and all that. We get that, but like the stuff that bothers me is the stuff that gets overlooked. Like the the DNA lottery, the genetic lottery of where you were born makes like a huge difference. And so it's like you can be the hardest working person, but if you were born in other countries or you're no matter how smart you are, how hard you work, you're reaping the benefits of living in a country that's got infrastructure, that has roads, that has, I mean, you talk about an ISP, for example, as a business, your whole business is possible because public tax dollars did the R&D that made the internet possible. So like, it's just crazy to me that we just like that so many people forget those things that lead to the even possibility for somebody to be able to work hard and build their own business.
That is a perfect lead into what you've decided will be our first topic for What the Tech.
What the tech?
What's the
Yes.
tech today?
What the tech today is two things, and I'm just going to hit it real quick because you see this a lot. I have Moonjoy. A lot of people I think did because it was like in this world, it's like, oh my God, a team of like highly competent people really pulled something off to a T. It's amazing. But of course, there's a lot of people, and I think it's a legit question to be like, what's the point of going to space when we've got so many problems on Earth? And that kind of question's been around for a while. But let me just say that space exploration, which is the budget for NASA is less than 1% of the federal budget.
Right. It's on the order of $20 billion. I think it has been for a while, right?
Right. And it has been for a while. So you want to talk about a bang for the buck? Because of space exploration, we have memory foam, phone cameras,
Oh my God,
MRIs,
I can't think about it.
CAT scans, freeze-dried food, scratch-resistant glasses, wireless headphones, computer mouses, GPS. To me, the value of GPS alone is probably worth what we spent going for space exploration, especially because GPS, and this is something that we can get into in another program, is so fundamental to the proper functioning of the internet itself. So that's my little what the tech wonder of Artemis and what it's led to. My other thing is highlighting what I consider to be maybe not the dumbest, but a really dumb space idea, which is Jeff Bezos and Elon talking about building these gigawatt data centers in space. Let me just say quickly, a gigawatt is roughly, I looked this up, is roughly the equivalent, is roughly the electrical output of a large nuclear power plant. Forget about the computing. The main challenge is launch mass and building infrastructure in space, not to mention meteor impacts, radiation damage, and data centers create a lot of heat. So you need like these comically large radiators. So even if you had cheaper launches, you would still need like thousands of them to do it. And then with the straight face, Bezos says these data centers will beat the cost of land-based data centers. And my question is, how? On Earth, there's like relatively cheap land. You've got existing power grids. You've got fiber. You've got easy maintenance. And you're going to probably in space need like laser arrays to deal with bandwidth or whatever. So good luck doing all of that in space. So that's my what the tech.
Yeah. I mean, I think even if data centers are paying their proper full cost, and there's different debates about what that includes, there's no way that they're cheaper in space. And for me, every article that talks about this should include the line, people who make all of their money launching things into space think we should launch more things into space.
Can't you just harness the power of the sun for your energy? Isn't that, I mean, I haven't looked.
I mean, you could do it in space. The sun's always shining, right? No one can hear you scream, but you're always in the sun depending on where you are and when you place these things. But the fact is that the sun we get lots of sun on the Earth, and battery storage is dropping significantly. And so Sean listed out the myriad reasons why it would be foolish, I think, to like commit to this or think that this is any kind of a solution. This is a solution for people that are trying to make more money launching things into space.
Yeah, exactly. You hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been fun. I do want to note that we are doing our first Unbuffered Live next week. So we're going to try and do these live shows. We have been doing them with Connect This. We've been doing those on like Thursdays and Fridays because that's when it had worked out. But to incorporate in the new schedule, we're going to be trying to do the live shows when we do them, which will probably be once or twice per month on Tuesday or Wednesday afternoons. And this one will be Tuesday afternoon at 2 Eastern time. Sean will have some stuff in the socials, but we're going to be having Heather Mills, who's been on Connect This before, and Doug Dawson, who is always on Connect This and helped make the show as good as it was, and Drew Garner from Benton Institute for Broadband and Society. Doing a lot. We're going to cover some BEAD for sure because with that lineup. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about the vacation I just took and how Verizon and T-Mobile did not both work anywhere I went. It was one or the other. So glad I have two SIMs. So anyway, we'll be talking about some other things, but we're going to have that live show. We're going to try and produce these a little bit better with more advanced warning and then more of the support. And Jade, we're looking forward to having Jade Pyros at a future one of those as well.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for having me on. Good.
Yeah, thank you all.
Roger that, Houston.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Unbuffered podcast. We have transcripts for this and other episodes available at ilsr.org/podcast. While you're there, check out our other podcasts from ILSR, including Building Local Power, Local Energy Rules, and the Composting for Community podcast. Email us at podcast@communitynets.org with your ideas for the show. Follow us on Blue Sky. Our handle is @CommunityNets. You can catch the latest research from all of our initiatives by subscribing to our monthly newsletter at ilsr.org. While you're there, please take a moment to donate. Your support in any amount helps keep us going. Unbuffered is produced by Christopher Mitchell with editing provided by me, Jordan Pittman. Special thanks to Riverside for providing the song Caveman. Until next time, thanks for listening.